Hello everybody. Well, we're on another trip. This time we're going way back down the memory lane. Now just a little heads up. The pictures are all digitized slides because when we took these pictures it was a long time ago, and at the time if you wanted to share your pictures you had a projector, you had a screen, and you all sat together with a cup of tea and you had a little slideshow. But unfortunately the quality of the slides over time have somewhat degraded. But we're doing the best we can. Now you're probably going to say, well, going from Canada to Switzerland, that's a pretty short video. You get on the plane, you get off the plane. Well, I have news for you. We took the scenic route. So get ready for a nice ride. The story starts April 27th, 1970. Karen and I, we got married and we kept it pretty low key. So in the afternoon we had a get together at the Mackenzie's. We had a early supper in the backyard and we had a jolly good time. We got to know the Mackenzie family. Well, Karen got to know them early on because when she was a little girl they were actually neighbors, and I got to know Kim because we worked the same company for a while. Dave, the blonde fellow, he was working at the Toronto University in the lab, and he was in the early days of the transistors, so he was developing all kinds of part of electronic instruments, etc. He was also a member of Mensa, so a very smart fellow. Unfortunately, he took a trip, an overdose in LSD, and that was the end of his career. He ended up a few years later as a custodian in a church. Ted and Katrine, Ted is a fellow at the very back and Katrine is sitting next to Kim. Ted got an engineering degree and he got a job with a oil company in Calgary, and so they moved out there. And on one day when he was on a business trip from Calgary to Edmonton northbound, some fellow coming southbound was driving way too fast, lost control of his cars, head-on collision, and it was a sorry end for Ted. And Katrine stayed out there and she raised her son on her own. And Kim went back to school, got a certification to be a chiropractor and a herbalist, and had a successful career. This kind of taught us how we need to embrace and cherish every day, because you never know when something goes sideways and things can change in a hurry. Also, if you meet a homeless chap, remember that don't all start out that way. Sometimes things go sideways and things don't work out. So I can just say be compassionate. This is our car for our trip, a 1957 Buick Roadmaster. Well, we're all packed, ready to go. So all we gotta do is hit the road. Here is the plan for our trip. We're basically planning to go to Montreal first to visit Ville and Mariage, and then from there we head straight south, all the way to Key West. Now, this happened in December because we did not take a honeymoon, as we decided to work and make some money for our trip. Now, about an hour and a half after we started, something happened that our race car driver fears. Yes, we blew the engine, and then we had to get it towed. It was a relatively small town, and got it to a garage, and the engine was beyond repair, but they were able to go to Wreckers and salvage a motor out of a 1960 Buick, and that was our ticket. And we ended up spending, I guess it was probably 4 days in a motel until the car was ready to go again. Now, due to the unexpected delay with car issues, we ended up having less time with Ville and Mariage because we had some reservations in New York, so we had to move on. But we had a good time with them, and it was always nice to be in their company. So we headed south towards New York. Of course, it was mid-December now, snow on the road. We're going through the Adirondacks, and travel was okay. So we arrived in New York City in the evening, and it was getting dark. And now you gotta remember, this is days before GPS, and all we had was a map of New York, and we had a reservation at Hotel Paris. Karen was the navigator, and it was sort of halfway down Manhattan. So we eventually got a little frustrated, and we ended up just pulling over, and we saw 2 police officers on the sidewalk, so we pulled over to them and said, "Can you please help us? We're looking for a Hotel Paris." The guy looks at us, he starts smiling, and he turned around, he says, "See the building behind me? That's Hotel Paris. And oh yeah, by the way, you need your headlamp there, your one headlamp's burned out." Well, that was a lucky start. Now, one thing we didn't realize when we got there, that there was a taxi strike. So when you see in the pictures, there's very little traffic because the taxis were on strike. So one night we also went to see a movie at the Broadway. We walked there because there was no taxis, and it actually wasn't too far from the hotel. But I must admit, on the way home in the dark, it just felt a little creepy, and so anyway, we survived. As we toured around, we also went up the Empire State Building, and it was opened May 1st, 1931. And then I realized that actually 40 years before us wandering around New York, my dad wandered around New York. My dad and his brother Willie, they left Switzerland May 1929 to go to Montreal to be together with their older brother, who had left earlier. Now my dad didn't stay there very long. He decided, I guess, that the big money was to be made in New York, so he traveled down New York and started working in New York, probably around somewhere late 29 or early 1930. Of course, as we all know, that was not the greatest of times to be going to New York. However, he told us that in the summertime wasn't too bad because he always was able to find work, but in the wintertime it was tough. So he ended up staying at the YMCA, and usually after about 10 days you get kicked out, then you moved on to the next YMCA, and on, and if you run out of YMCA you just slept on the subway. In the summertime when you had work it wasn't so bad, but you still ended up sleeping under bridges. So I looked a bit into it, and I was curious what the wages were now in the 30s. Your monthly income, averaging as a construction worker, was about $75 a month. Of course, you got to compare that with your expenses. So rent was anywhere between $10 to $15 a month, and interestingly, there seemed to be three levels of rents. One was for blacks, and then there's another one was for immigrants, and then there was just your regular citizen. And now what's interesting, your breakfast meal was 25 cents. You can buy lunch for 50 cents and dinner for 75. So you're probably in the average for making between $4 and $5 a day. And so the numbers didn't look all that bad. Now here the big caveat is you had to have work. If you had work, you did okay, but if you had no work, you're out of luck. Now my dad seemed to make out okay. He ended up buying a car, and he, after 4 years, decided he was going to go back up to Montreal. Well, at the Canadian border, the fellow asked him to open up the trunk and see what he had in there, because I guess he was during Prohibition and he was make sure he wasn't smuggling booze. Anyway, the custom guy saw that my dad had some construction work in clothes, and he says, "Oh well, we have enough construction workers. We don't need any more in Canada." So he had to turn around and go back, sold his car, and went back to Switzerland. Another interesting comparison is that my dad was 18 when he came to Canada, and so he was probably 19, 20 when he came to New York City by himself. And when I came to Canada, I was 18, so looks like traveling was in our blood. Well, back on the road again. I guess it's heading towards Philadelphia. Been so long ago, my brain's just kind of gotten a little mushy. Now we're going to see a few of those famous buildings in Washington, D.C. Lincoln Memorial. Makes a fellow look pretty small. And Karen looking out towards the reflection pond. Unfortunately, the light is a bit overbearing there. War memorial from the Pacific engagement, I guess it was in the 50s. This John Kennedy's Memorial Cemetery. Kind of looks like the White House. Well, we left Washington behind and further south we go. You can see there's a happy fellow. You can smell the warmth and look at the snow in the rearview mirror. Well, there's some southern homesteads. Look a little bit like the same better days. And now we're arriving in St. Augustine. St. Augustine was established in 1565 and is the oldest continuous settlement of European descent. Of course, it was the Spaniards who kind of took over part of Florida. There's some beautiful old buildings and great looking palm trees and gardens. Yay, finally we're camping. And now look at that, wearing shorts. Happy days. Well, it always is time to get that dirt off the car. Yeah, and now look at that. We're actually at the ocean. Lovely warm water, soft sand. There's a little horse and buggy tour you can take. Or you can just stroll in the old park. You can definitely see the influence of the Spanish architecture. And this is where they, at the slave market, you can see in the railing there, that's how they used to chain them up. Very sad times. Now we're driving over to the fort. There was a great big fort right at the ocean that the Spaniards built later on. And there's Mr. Cool smoking his pipe. Somebody had to have a bad habit, eh? Well, look at that. Now that's what I call a beach. Daytona Beach. And you could still at that time drive on the beach, no problem. Now we're doing a little trip through Cape Canaveral, the Kennedy Space Center, where somebody, I guess at the time NASA had all the rockets built there. It's inside the control room, and it's funny how you look at some of the displays and you imagine what nowadays they got all the walls covered with large screens. And this is a building, and in front of the building is actually the carrier that carried the rocket to the launch site. And was inside the building. It's amazing size. And this is, I guess, a replica of the lunar lander. Very interesting. Now the Busch Garden also had a nice show with water skiers. It was quite impressive. And also this guy had a bit of a kite there, and he was going up quite a ways. Of course he was pulled with a motorboat. Nice cactus garden. Guess who that guy is? Looks like he's showing off. And on we went, going down to the Everglades. So on the top of his perch, I was pulled over and said, "Hey Karen, take a picture." And she wasn't happy about that, but I thought that was pretty funny. I guess one of the things you can't do anymore nowadays with the traffic. And then we had a fire at the gas station and put it out and survived. Well, now we're on to Miami. Well, one thing about Miami, you always find Cadillacs now. I thought that if you want to have a good business in Miami Beach, you gotta have a Cadillac dealership. Of course, when you're in Miami, you also gotta go see the Marine Aquarium with all the fancy shows and the different animals. It was very well orchestrated and well done. South of Miami, we also stopped at this place that was actually a snake farm where they were milking the serum from the snake, so I get or the poison from the snake to make serum out of it, and it's quite an interesting setup. Of course, Karen is quite brave there, handling the snake, not poisonous. I don't know about this fellow, he looks a bit chicken. I don't think he's so keen on handling that snake. Just give me a sailboat and let me out of here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there's a lot of snakes in this bush. Very wild. We also went down to the port. There was this huge cruise ship there. I guess it was Queen Elizabeth II. Of course, compared to nowadays, it's not that big, but it was quite impressive at the time. Well, we're in the Everglades camping, and one morning we decided, well, we can take a tour with the guide for bird watching. So we're in our tent, and it sounded like it was raining. We decided, oh well, we're not going to go. And then finally around 9 o'clock, it kind of got warmer in the tent. Decided, let's go and see what's going on. Well, it wasn't raining. It was just a gentle breeze was moving the leaves, and the leaves made it sound like as if it was raining. So we tried again the next day, and we did end up going for the hike in the morning, and it was very interesting. It's a lot of different birds and critters, even little spiders. Somewhere in there's a crocodile. It's quite interesting to see all the different birds. Like this is a anhinga, and I guess it doesn't have oil in the feathers. That's why it's just hanging out there, drying its wings. That's definitely a flamingo. Beautiful color. Looks like a heron to me. Well, sunrise at the campground. Yep, time to cook breakfast. It was a lovely spot for camping. Yeah, just hanging out, be lazy. Karen's having a relaxing day too. And this is across the ways was a guy with a Airstream camper. Of course, that's a Cadillac of campers.
Here we are driving past the beautiful nursery selling bougainvilleas. Here's a close-up. So many bougainvilleas, much like Granddad used to have his geraniums. Hibiscus, beautiful, just very inspiring. Even a hedge, colored hedge, little flowers. Such a different landscape than what we left behind that December. A century plant, or I think it's a relative of Yucca filamentosa.
Well, and we're off across the bridges to Key West. There's a chain of islands, and they're all connected by the highway. Highway number 1.
Highway number 1 in the sun, and we stopped at Bahia Honda and set up our tent, and towels drying on the old Buick.
Well, even the birds are just hanging out on the pier and having a lazy afternoon.
And out of the ocean came this fellow carrying a lobster for us to buy, and I bought it and we made it for supper, although this fellow didn't want to have any.
Also, he wasn't the guy who walked out of the ocean with that lobster. But there's a mermaid, and she liked puttering around in the water. Look at it, a nice, crisp, clear ocean.
Yeah, those were the days when we had these kind of octagon type glasses, and talking on the picnic table with tent camper nearby. He was from Australia. That was his yellow car in the background. And then by night, meditation, writing in the journal about the day's experiences.
Yeah, that was actually a pretty rough campground. It just seemed like we were parking on a gravel parking lot. Now we're at the more southern point of the United States.
Conch shells. They even had conch chowder in those days too, and these could be turned into horns.
There's a fellow busy making hats, or if you want to turn them over, it could be baskets, but he sure had strong hands. This is the house where Hemingway lived.
And all his 14 cats.
And they were still there, well, some of them.
Some of the generation proceeding from that.
This is the neighborhood of where he lived, and it was the old part of Key West, where he somewhat secluded. I guess that's where he wanted to live. You don't want to be in the main drag. And this is the old bank, and
a young girl sitting on a bench.
Yeah, just watching all the boys go by. This is the bank from another angle, and the sort of the similar architecture they have in New Orleans with all the balconies, same as a stately home. I guess because back then they didn't have air conditioning, so sitting outside was a way to cool off. Old fishing boat, a lot of shrimp fishing down there, and here's a boat that you could hire to go out fishing. And some lucky duck had a boat there, sailboat. There's a shed with all the fishing nets. Sun setting down, and everybody's getting their margaritas.
Looking for second helpings. These little pelicans, they could swallow one of those fish whole down their beaks.
And here we're leaving Florida, flying up over Miami. So you probably wondered, what about the old Buick? Well, the night before I looked up in the Yellow Pages to auto wreckers, and so once we had the car parked at the airport, I signed all the papers, put the car keys in the glove compartment, and I called the wreckers up and says, well, there's a car to be picked up. And that was the end of that car. Somehow I wish I still have it, but that's life, just doesn't turn out that way. So anyway, we're now flying to New York, and from New York over to Lisbon. However, when we get closer to Lisbon, this is, well, there is all fogged in, they couldn't land, so they carried on to Barcelona. So we end up having the first day in Europe in Barcelona. So they put us up in a nice hotel in Barcelona, and we had a bit of a walk around in the evening, because it seemed like there's a lot of people in the street, and either some sort of festival. But anyway, it was very pleasant. And then the next day we're flown back to Lisbon, Portugal. Well, now we're in Lisbon, and we stayed in a nice hotel downtown, and it was very pleasant. And we enjoyed the breakfast there. A nice pastry, good coffee. So, and we walked around. Now, one thing that really hit me is the pollution. So all the taxis, there was a lot of taxis driving around, and they all were running on diesel. So it was very smelly and almost like a haze. And even in the side streets, they had little markets going on where a little lady would sell their stuff. And you can see here in this picture, when you look down the narrow street, how hazy it looks, and mostly because of that diesel. And I guess there was not many places to hang your laundry, so you just hang it outside on the street side. This is looking out from our hotel room. There was very convenient there downtown. Also nearby was a market, and it was not a market for vegetarians. It was a lot of meat, all kinds of critters, and I wonder how safe it was to eat. Also, there was an indoor fish market. Unfortunately, the pictures, I couldn't make it any brighter, but there's a lot of fish in there. Of course, at Lisbon being on the ocean, there would be a big selection of fishes. And then there was a bit of a flea market as well. You could buy all kinds of, well, I call it junk, but I guess some people call it collector items. And they had some big squares, and we walked up one of the hills there and overlooking the city. It had some beautiful sculptures and fountains. Of course, it never freezes there, so those fountains be going all the year round. But you can see how some of the buildings look a bit on the dirty side because of all this pollution. So you can see it was very densely built, and there's actually very little big trees. Another one of those monuments, don't know, for somebody. And then we're on top of the hill we walked up, there was a bit of a fort with a cannon, and Karen's having her little lunch there. We ate a lot of bread. It was good stuff. And also up by that fort was a bit of a little botanical garden with different birds and animals. Flamingos. Wonder how they can stand still like that. Well, next phase we're flying from Lisbon to Canary Islands, and that's another story right there. Well, one of the surprises was when we approached the Canary Islands. Of course, it's a series of islands, but this one, it was snow covered. And oh wow, did we take a wrong turn somewhere? But then I didn't know there was a fairly high mountains, plus it was January. So I'm sure July and August there'd be no snow up there. So anyway, we had reservations for this beautiful hotel, and we didn't know when we booked a hotel that was actually sort of like a tourist attraction, because it seemed to be very well visited and a lot of tourists there. So anyway, it was quite amazing. I don't know whether it was a festival or whether it was just a show they put on for tourists, but I do think it was it might even be January 1st. I don't recall exact what date. So this is sitting on the balcony. We're up on the 3rd floor. You're just same height as treetops, and that was the highlight of our visit to Canary Islands, was the hotel and the food. And you could also take a horse and buggy ride through town. So then one day we decided, let's go to the beach. And well, that was a shock. Here we thought we were going to see a beach like in Florida, wide open, blue oceans. We walked up there, it was like a wall of people. Then there was these guys renting out chairs, or like lounge chairs. So anyway, we just made a U-turn and kept walking. There was these guys had all the nets spread out to dry out and repair. And so we toured around the Tenerife and took the sights in. You can see that these guys didn't believe in heavy-duty scaffolding. I guess their workman's compensation guys wouldn't let them get away with that. Well, it's 2 o'clock, time for a siesta. So construction shut down. I guess the whole town actually shut down. Everybody's having a nap. And then we decided that didn't really want to go to the local beach, so we looked at the map and said, well, there's some beaches on the south side of the island. So we got a bus that would take us down there, and it was actually quite interesting behind it. So you can see that the beach was a little bit better, and you could actually rent one of those cabins, I guess. Well, one of it you could be out of the sun and be a change room. And then the way back, we kind of went through the center of the island, and you can see it's quite mountainous. It was very nice. Be actually a fun place to go and take a long hike. Look at the flowers. I think they were poinsettias, and they were like huge. Pretty flowers. And then we're flying to Casablanca from Canary Islands. Now that was a trip in itself. So the plane we got on was, I think it was a leftover from the Second World War, and that thing was noisy as hell. Bumpy ride, and the inside looked similar to this. And I remember seeing the parachutes hanging on the wall, and I said to myself, oh, well, hope we don't need those things, but at least they're ready to go. But we made it. So we landed at the Casablanca airport, and then from there we had to take the bus to go to downtown Casablanca. Well, we walked out of the terminal, and there was a bus there, and all these guys scrambling around, and next thing you know, my suitcase was gone. It's on top of the bus, and we get on the bus, and it takes us downtown. Get out of the bus, and there's all these guys again scrambling around the bus. Next thing you know is the suitcase is down, and I'm about to reach for it. Well, some guy grabbed it already, and he put it in his cart. He looks at me, he says, hotel, hotel, hotel. So okay, I give him the name of the hotel where we had a reservation. And he takes off. It's like, well, I guess you better follow this guy because he's got our suitcase, he got our stuff. So anyway, we followed him, get to the hotel, and then he demanded some money. Of course, we're new to the country, so we didn't know the currency, didn't know what things were worth. Paid the guy, and we go in the lobby, and the guy looks at me and says, oh yeah, we have reservation. Yeah, and says, so did you pay this guy for the bringing the suitcase? Yeah. So how much you pay him? And I told him how much it was. Oh man, you pay way too much, way too much. Well, that's when we learned that in Morocco, a price is not a price. The price is a starting negotiating. So anyway, that was kind of this our beginning of Morocco, and it kind of got to be very interesting. So we decided that maybe wise to get some help to move around Casablanca and Morocco in general. So we hired this young fellow to be a tour guide to the Medina, the old part of this town. And so anyway, it was actually quite smart because nobody bucked us anymore after that. And you can see that kid didn't go to school. There's a lot of kids not going to school, just helping the parents, running their little shops and do whatever has to be done. There's some beautiful architecture, amazing arches. And this was in a sort of similar to a monastery, I guess, where they would, where kids were taught the Quran, and they had all these little rooms where they, I guess, had their studies. Amazing buildings and the facade. I guess these buildings were probably 600-700 years old, and the only thing that can do is destroy them is war or earthquakes. And you can see the laundry hanging out there, and a lot of the activities, I think, is on the rooftops, because they could move and do their thing. Now from Casablanca we went up to Meknes and Fez, but we took a bus because the train service was direct. We wanted to see a bit of the countryside, so they had these pretty wild buses, and we got to explore. Still at I guess the suburb of Casablanca, where you see the farming was still quite primitive. Donkeys and plows. Now the other thing that was kind of funny, every time we pulled into a town, the bus stopped, people got on, people got off, but there was always some handicapped people scrambling on the bus, and they started begging for money. And we noticed was a Frenchman. Of course, Morocco used to be a French colony, so French was the official language. Now, incidentally, it's an old brickyard. So anyway, he would always, as soon as you pulled into a stop somewhere, you pull up a newspaper and hide his face behind the paper. So we thought that was a good strategy. I think this is the Royal Palace. Must be in Meknes, where the king lives. Very barren countryside. I guess it's January, so it would be too dry to grow anything. Why the old temples? This building, or I guess more like ruins of seen better days. Yeah, amazing to think of how many people have gone through those gates. That looks like it was an old aqueduct. A little girl is dashing after something or other. Now we're approaching Tangiers. Yeah, bigger ships. That's the narrowest point from Africa to Europe. So we took a ferry, and that's Rock of Gibraltar. Unfortunately, it was very overcast and hazy. And from there we took the overnight train to Switzerland, and couldn't take many pictures in the dark. And also I think we ran out of film. So anyway, and that's the end of the story. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.